Forgiveness is a very difficult thing to talk about because a lot of times we want to hear someone apologize. The reality is you might not ever get that. That's what I meant when I said, it's for me to swallow and ultimately stop the cycle.
If you listen to the Broken Instruments podcast, in episode 25, I mentioned a few things about breaking family curses. And not that anybody took offense to it, but I did get a comment or a question about what I said when I was talking about breaking the cycle, and how I said, if you're trying to break the cycle, you don't necessarily have to go back to the person who you feel like might have wronged you. And a lot of times when we think about solving issues or solving problems, especially when it deals with someone else, it's important for us to connect with that person again and hash things out. Now, I would say for most cases, yes. However, I feel like there is a fine line where if you try to do that, it could potentially make things worse. So when I said that I was going to be the one to take ownership of the situation, of the problem, and resolve it from there, and I was talking about having resolve as a person and breaking the cycle of family curses and things like that. So what I was getting to is something that I feel very deeply about. It's something along the lines of atoning with your parents, or seeking atonement with your parents. And simply put, atonement is not seeking forgiveness, not going to forgive somebody. When someone says getting right with God, getting right with somebody, getting right with your parents, there's so much more than forgiving, and there's so much more than hashing things out. And I think that's a big issue with us nowadays. When I became a parent, the first couple months obviously was a big transition period for me and Gracie. And we did an important thing. We decided to start recording just talks, which kind of led me to what I'm doing now with the podcasts and everything. So we started recording recap talks. We would record video and audio for our daughter, Amela. And what I told myself and what I told Gracie was, I wish I had a video of my parents when I was that age, 1 month old, 2 months old, 4 months old. And imagine how they would be talking and what they would express to you while you were still an infant, a newborn baby. So we started recording these I called them Carreon legacy talks, and it was very therapeutic for one as parents, but it also got me to think a lot about the difficulties of being a parent. And from that point on, I saw more and more clearly that our parents, at one point in our lives when we were very young, they didn't have it all together, and they struggled, and they were learning the way we're learning right now. So growing up, I know that there was a point in time where we always believed our parents were superhuman. We always looked up to our parents and looked to them for protection, and we still do. But it's more of an understanding now of, they were doing their best with their best understanding at the time. And again, with Dynamic Man, the podcast, and my take on fatherhood and parenthood, it's very objective. I want to remove a lot of emotion, and only have positive emotion when it comes to something like the conversations we're having here. But when we think of good parents or bad parents, there's so much subjectivity there. There's so much emotion that plays along with that, and let's kind of isolate that to the side a little bit. What I'm talking about is, instead of having good parents or bad parents, or being wronged by certain things, look at the situation with altitude, separate yourself from the situation, and look at it objectively. And I think that's how we can get a little bit more empathy with our parents or with people that might have wronged us. One thing we talk about a lot, especially in mental health and especially with society and community nowadays, if someone was wronged in the past, if they were abused, if they were abandoned or neglected, those words alone, just the ideas alone, cause this emotional reaction for all of us. And it's almost like, if you were wronged in the past, part of you wants to seek vengeance or seek revenge on the person. Now, in those specific cases, like I don't want to say it's okay, right? Obviously, bad things happen, and we don't want to say, let's just accept that happened to you. That sounds so insensitive, right? What's important to talk about is how can we take ownership of that traumatic experience. Now, I'm not saying to just accept the fault of someone else. I'm not saying to just automatically forgive them. But I want to ask you, how much does that serve you now? If we stay in that traumatic event and we let that traumatic event continue to affect us every day or every time something triggers it, you prolong that event for longer than it should. There's an element of stoicism and detachment for things that happen to us, whether it's good or bad, whether it was meant to be or we felt like it was just out of the ordinary, it shouldn't have happened. A lot of bad things happen in this world. And I don't want you to think that, just bad things happen to you or bad things happen to me. Everything happens to everyone. And I know it's a very dark thought to think that, suffering is inevitable. Sacrifice and a hard life, a difficult life is inevitable. But at the end of the day, life is hard, regardless of who you are. You're interacting with an entire world, experiencing life as one individual that has a rare experience compared to everybody else. And yes, everybody has experienced pain, just like everyone's experienced joy. So the idea of attaching ourselves to a specific emotion for the rest of our lives, or completely resisting specific emotions for the rest of our lives, or suppressing it or repressing it, at that point we can't move forward and we can't live. Now, where I'm getting to is a person that cannot detach and holds on to certain traumas and suppresses it completely until they explode. These are the types of things that cause a cycle of curses. I think when people think of family curses, they think of like, addiction or mental health, or just a family curse like infidelity, a family curse of physical abuse. I don't want to bring up these hard things, but it's kind of the reality, and it's what a lot of people are going through nowadays. So when we talk about these curses, right, I don't want you to think like, this one curse is sustained throughout my whole family lineage. What you have to think about is separate from that one type of curse or negative thing that happens. And once you gain altitude and look objectively at the entire thing, what you might have is a cycle and a fluctuation of different curses. And this is what I was getting to in that episode, in episode 25. You have someone who was, let's say, abandoned as a kid. And part of the defense mechanism was altruism, right? It's a very healthy thing to be altruistic. You want to help people, help kids that have been orphaned in life for all the other reasons, right? Why someone becomes an orphan. So you create an orphanage for those children. Very altruistic defense mechanism. It's not a bad thing. It's a very healthy thing. But we got to be aware of what we're doing now. So when someone was neglected or abandoned in the past, and then now that person has children of their own, they might be overcompensating now. They might be overprotective and overwhelming their children because they know what it's like to be neglected. So because they felt neglected, I'm going to change the way I raise my children, and I'm going to do the complete opposite extreme of neglect, where I might be overbearing now. I might be controlling, which starts, and it keeps the cycle going. It keeps the cycle going from neglect to overbearing, and now your children, who you are overbearing and overwhelming to, they're rebellious now. Because like, mom, dad, leave me alone, man. Like you're smothering me. So that's the cycle that I'm talking about, where we're overcompensating both sides. What I really want to get to is understanding, for one, that no one is perfect, that our parents aren't perfect, and that's okay. It's not a judgment on our parents. It's not a judgment on my parents. They did the best that they could with what they had. Now, given the circumstances, given the conditions, if your parents made wrong decisions, obviously there's this emotional attachment to that. What I was trying to get to, and what I'm trying to talk about now, is how can we generate atonement with our parents? How can we find a way to stop the cycle with us? Because we recognize that there's a cycle happening. We have to take ownership of this, take ownership of our family, and stop cycles where they're at and generate good, healthy cycles. Now, forgiveness is a very difficult thing to talk about, because a lot of times we want to hear someone apologize. We want to hear them say, I'm sorry for this reason, I'm sorry for that reason. Ask for forgiveness, like, please forgive me. The reality is you might not ever get that. The people that we're looking to forgive, or we're open to forgive, might never even realize that they did something wrong. I may never realize that I treated my daughter a certain way as she grows up, right? Now, is it their fault? Is it is it that person's fault if they're not capable of understanding that? No, it's the level of understanding. That's as far as they can go. That's as capable as they are. So if we wait around and wait for this person to ask for forgiveness, you might be waiting forever, and you might hold a grudge forever, and your entire life is stained with this one situation that you're waiting for someone to apologize for. So instead of seeking seeking to forgive somebody, what I'm trying to understand with me too is to forego in order to atone, right? And again, with atonement, it's not necessarily like, all right, hashing things out. It's a lot of making the situation right, finding common ground. And yeah, honestly, you might not have an interaction with that person ever again. You might not have to. That's what I meant when I said, it's for me to swallow and digest and ultimately stop the cycle. It takes a lot of understanding and self-awareness of other people. And it's the most difficult thing. I'm going to be honest with you. It's the most difficult thing, especially when you feel like your family has wronged you, right? Instead of seeking to just forgive somebody, I think we should seek to forego certain things that have happened and work hard at crafting a better cycle for us so that it stops with us, so it does not trickle down to our kids. And that's what I meant by breaking the cycles of different curses, different things that happen to our family. With society nowadays, with family nowadays, there's so many things that have happened. And I think there's a million different reasons why I feel like society is deteriorated. Relationships, families have deteriorated. And it's so hard to see and to understand, because we lived a life understanding, one way of thinking. Culture was this way, and then community and society was telling us a certain thing, a different thing, and then religion was telling us a different thing, and then our family values were teaching us, our families were teaching us these values. So many things were being told to us when we were growing up. Then you get to a certain age when you start realizing your understanding in life, and you're like, oh, I have my own thoughts now. I have my own way of thinking now, and it's influenced by all this stuff, but I'm going to choose my path. See how chaotic this can sound already. It already sounds chaotic to me. And this is what I'm seeing even more now. The issue is a lot of us hold on to traumas. We hold on to situations and circumstances and we use those as excuses. And I'm talking to myself as well. It takes a lot of self-awareness, just awareness in general, awareness of other people, awareness of what happens to us emotionally, mentally. These are patterns of behavior that we picked up along the way. Now, with kids nowadays and even young adults nowadays, there's this big idea that, like my parents just don't understand what life is anymore. The world is different than when they were kids. And yes, of course, the world is different, but I think we're taking a little credit away from how much our parents have actually lived through. I there are different ways to raise your kids now. There's different whatever it is, technology or strategies to raise your kids now. And I can't say, oh, my parents, like, man, they didn't understand this. Those things didn't exist back then. Yeah, so with new knowledge and new practice, obviously there's new things that are occurring, but it's for me to make that decision whether it is going to be healthy for my kid or not. And I'm not going to do it just cuz it's negating whatever my parents said. You have to collect all the knowledge and collect all the information that we need to make a good decision and really weigh the options, if it's good or not, if it's healthy or not. So again, it's not because our parents didn't understand and they just don't understand. They lived in a different world, yes, but it's not that because we live in this world, that we're smarter than them. It doesn't mean that we're better than them. Again, remove subjectivity. Given the situation, given the circumstances, how we're different from our parents for a reason, right? Now, taking all the information from how they dealt with life, how we see other people deal with life, and we hear stories of other families. We read books, we watch movies, we watch TV, we watch YouTube. We collect all this information and we craft our own way of living. We craft our own way of thinking about certain things. And when we grow up, our kids might even think that that's imperfect. Because we're all imperfect, because we live in this society, in this world that is always changing, we have to understand and have empathy for everybody else in our family, in our world. Ultimately, we have to atone with people that we feel like have wronged us. And again, making things right, rectifying things, the ball doesn't have to be in their court. The ball is in your court. I'm not going to wait around to see if people are going to ask for forgiveness. Why don't I forego that confrontation again and forgive them already? Would that be the better thing to do? Me seeking this moment of them apologizing and asking for forgiveness, that might be an ego thing for us, right? That might be an ego thing for me. Wanting to hear it from that one person, like, hey, please forgive me, or I'm sorry. That might never come. So what do I do now? I have to continue to live the best life that I can. If I'm too busy waiting for things like that, then I'm not living at that point anymore. So see, it's really, this is me talking to myself, right? We have to take ownership of our life, not, F the world. And you know what? Like, no one tells me what to do. It's not that kind of ownership. Taking ownership of your life can be letting people live who they are. Let people live their truth, because you're going to live your truth. And it's okay. No one is perfect. No one knows 100% the right thing. And I think we have to get past ourselves. We got to get over ourselves, get around ourselves, because that ego of that we have, that ego that says, no, you have the right way of thinking, that you have the right way to do things. We got to get past that, because at some point, again, we're going to get humbled, and yeah, we're not perfect people. Look in the mirror, reflect, look at yourself. There's nothing about us that's perfect. And that's the hardest thing to to accept. But I think once we accept that, it's a lot easier to forgive people. When I became a parent, it helped me atone with my parents, to realize that they were doing their best, not that they did bad. I mean, I think I turned out okay. Atone with your parents, atone with your grandparents, your ancestors. Given the life that they had, they might have seen life through a specific lens. It wasn't wrong. It was the best that they could. I have to trust that people do the best that they can. Now, if they didn't recognize that cycles were happening, if they didn't recognize that they needed to break curses and that they were affecting their children, their grandchildren a certain way, that is not their fault. If you are aware of this, I think that's really our responsibility now. If we're aware of this, we should be responsible to break those cycles, break those unhealthy curses, cycles of curses. And I mean, realistically, you are not your parents, you are not your grandparents, you are not your ancestors. In that case, you are your own person, collecting all the information from our ancestors, being put in this specific moment in time and trying to figure out the best way that we could live it. You know, when I look to my children, it's going to take a lot of being and staying self-aware. It takes a lot of empathy. It takes a lot of understanding and patience. And I mean, I love being a father. I think one of the most important things is being a father isn't necessarily just because I have kids. Being a father is because I'm always thinking ahead, is because I'm always trying to be the stability for my loved ones. And I really think that's one of our callings as men, not just fathers, but becoming a father. You really have to think ahead. You really have to own your bullshit, have self-awareness, show up, do what's needed, do what's right for your family. And consistently doing that every day is draining. Yeah. And I think that's why it's such such an important vocation in life, to have the responsibility of other people. People are affected by your decisions. People are affected by your emotions, your mood. We have to be self-aware. We have to understand how completely sensitive and delicate this is. This life is not easy. And I mean, look at the world that we live in now. Instead of blaming everybody else, like, oh, that's how they were, this is what happened. I think it sounds so cliche, but you could be the change. How do you do that? By taking ownership of it, by swallowing it, dropping our pride, and basically accepting it the way it is. Forgive and forego.